The new FFT isn't going to have Dark Knights or Onion Knights. FFT is dropping all of the animated story cutscenes. FFT isn't going to have certain guest characters or special missions. These are just a few of the statements that I've seen people saying in my comments on Twitter and in other people's comments on other people's videos about the new upcoming FFT Ivalice Chronicles. And I'm here to say, y'all need to pump the brakes. And we're going to talk about why. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my ongoing coverage of the upcoming and frankly, pretty soon to be released Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. Also, as always, huge thank you to all of my channel members and my patrons. Y'all make it much, much easier to keep doing YouTube with the pretty much full-time regularity that I do, especially in terms of being able to pump out these videos as fast as I can. So if you would like to help support alongside those fine folks, you can find links to both my YouTube memberships and my Patreon in the description. As a huge heads up, my Patreon is a little bit of a mess right now. I'm working on figuring out what new things I can add to it as extra incentives and the like for all you fine folks who do support me there. But right now, if you do just want to support the channel, that is a good way to do so. Again, thank you very much. So what is happening with this whole discussion that has suddenly cropped up in the just 2 days since Ivalice Chronicles was revealed? This discussion that we're not getting a bunch of content that came from the War of the Lions version of the game. Well, it stems from a couple of different places. First of all, we actually have this very handy, maybe kind of leaked, accidentally posted, whatever, image of the job selection screen as it will appear in Ivalice Chronicles. And huge shout out to friend of the channel, Coffee Potato, for showing this one to me. Apparently one of his community members found it, so huge shout out to him. He has a video similar to this one that is already out if you want to go and check that out. I'll have a link to that in the description as well. Great creator, highly recommend him. But we can see here that the only classes that seem to be available for Agrius are the original classes or jobs that existed in the original release of Final Fantasy Tactics, meaning that we do not see the Dark Knight or the Onion Knight, nor do we see any other new classes or jobs, but that's a topic for a different day. We'll talk about that later. Right now, we want to focus on the DK and the OK. People are taking this as direct confirmation that A, these jobs are not existing in the game at this point, and B, as another piece of evidence that War of the Lions content in general is not going to exist in the game. We'll get to that second part a little bit later. Let's talk about the classes first. If you're not aware, Dark Knight and Onion Knight are two jobs that were added as sort of references to the history of Final Fantasy in the release of the War of the Lions on PSP, and they kind of came in pretty awkwardly. Dark Knight required that you master Knight and Black Mage or Wizard, as well as getting to level 8 with, I think, Dragoon, Samurai, Ninja, and Geomancer? Can't remember quite off the top of my head. It's been a little while since I looked at the exact unlock requirements, but it was a ludicrous amount of skill grinding and JP grinding, on top of the fact that you needed to crystallize 20 enemies with one unit, which is just not something that normally happens in the course of a normal run of the game. So unless you're grinding like crazy, you're basically never going to get this job unlocked for you until you get to basically the end of the game, and considering there's almost no endgame content in the original releases of FFT, there was very little reason to use it other than just for fun. Combine that with the fact that the class was just absolutely disgustingly overpowered, and it was just kind of there because, you know, Dark Knight is really cool and edgy, and it exists in Final Fantasy, and here's a little thing for you guys for the new version of the game. Cool, whatever. Onion Knight was even more odd, as to unlock it, you had to master Squire and Chemist, and then you would have a job that could use no skills, but could use every piece of equipment in the game, but had terrible stats. Until you got all other jobs mastered, and then it got the most broken stats in the game. So you could just run around and like one-shot everything, just annihilate things. Also, again, a very odd job, but again, a reference to things like Final Fantasy III, where Onion Knight was one of the iconic jobs from that game, and it is a core part of Final Fantasy's history. Because of how weird these jobs are, I've talked in the past on the channel in videos kind of theorizing or spitballing or wishlisting what it is that I'd like to see from FFT Reborn, as we were calling it at the time, that if these jobs were going to be included, they had to be reworked in some way. Their unlock conditions changed, and the way their skills function, or just overall class identity functions in terms of Onion Knight, completely overhauled to make them fit in the game's ecosystem. If they can't do that, then I don't want to see them in the game, because frankly, they're just silly. Like, yeah, you could have them for that endgame type content, and maybe if we're getting a bunch of endgame content in Ivalice Chronicles, then they could be good there, but I won't lament their loss if they're not going to be better folded in to the overall environment of the game. As far as why we aren't seeing them here, and if that means that they're definitely not in the game, I wouldn't go that far. I've actually seen some interesting rumblings from folks who are talking about how they might have more specific unlock conditions that maybe aren't showing up here in Agrius's normal list of jobs, because they are more special classes that don't just have to do with getting certain job levels in other jobs. Take, for example, things like Tactics Ogre Reborn, where there's actually whole classes that are locked behind quest lines or specific scenarios that you have to go through to find them. And maybe we could see something kind of similar to that for a few of these more out there, not unique jobs in terms of like only one character, only special characters can have them, but definitely more odd jobs. If that were the case, I would be totally fine with that, and it could explain why it doesn't show up here, but that is, of course, complete speculation. We have no confirmation of that one way or the other. As far as other War of the Lions content that is missing from the game, quote-unquote, big air quotes around missing, we have a lot of discussion around, well, Balthier and Luceau, special guest characters that were added to the War of the Lions version of the game. We haven't seen them. Where are they? Oh, what about all the multiplayer features? The game is currently listed as single player on Steam. Does that mean that we're not going to actually have any of the Rendezvous or Melee missions that people really enjoyed if they got to play them, but didn't often get to play them? Because how often did you have a friend with a PSP who also liked FFT when you were younger? A little dodgy on that one. What about all the animated cutscenes? We haven't seen anything with them except for the intro, which we'll talk about. And we have seen certain particular scenes like Ramza and Lita in the field talking about their grass whistles, which was animated in the War of the Lions version. What about special missions where we got extra information about Beowulf's backstory and special boss fights with more unique gear, or special fights in old maps that, again, gave a little bit of extra context for the story, or were just fun little challenge scenarios that would give you, again, cool gear? What about any of that? We haven't seen any of that. This has all evolved into a narrative that's saying that none of the War of the Lions content has been added to this version of the game, that is being built off of the original PSX release, and that for some reason maybe Matsuno and his team have an agenda or a grudge or something else against the PSP release. And I think that's where people need to kind of calm down a little bit here. Realistically, we have seen extremely little about Ivalice Chronicles. We haven't seen the majority of the cast. We haven't seen the majority of the classes in action. We've seen nothing from the endgame whatsoever except for one quick clip of Sid absolutely bodying somebody with a Divine Knight skill. We haven't seen any of the job screens. There is a ton of information that is missing. So to begin speculating and saying that nothing from War of the Lions is here, a little bit much. A little bit much. For a lot of these, we literally just haven't been shown anything. We have no evidence to say that it doesn't exist. We have no evidence to say that it does exist. We'll only know that Balthier and Luceau are in the game when we see them. We'll only see some of those special expanded scenarios when we see them. So those things just not worth speculating about at the moment. As far as the cutscenes are concerned, I think that's a pretty easy one to understand. It is important to note that we have seen a couple of animated cutscenes right at the beginning of the reveal trailer, and people were making the assumption or telling me that this is evidence that the War of the Lions cutscenes are in the game, because these are the cutscenes from that game. That is not true at all. The intro cutscene that we see in the trailer is completely different from the intro cutscene of War of the Lions or the PS1 release as well. I can put comparisons right here on the screen. I went back and I rewatched the whole thing just to confirm these are not the same cutscene. Understand why people can get confused because it's been almost 20 years, but like not the same cutscene. And the scene where Ovilia is praying in Orban Monastery at the beginning of the game has never been animated before, so that is also a completely new addition. Why they would do that? I think it's just a simple matter of these cutscenes were originally animated on the PSP. The formatting, the resolution, the overall fidelity of all of the images probably wouldn't translate very well to an HD screen. So taking the chance to go back to completely redo or for the first time animate some of the most important scenes in the game to make sure that they land, to make sure that that impact is there, the same way that it was on the PSP version, except now on a much bigger screen with a new voice cast, completely understandable. I don't think this means that we won't have as many animated cutscenes, we don't really know. But they have clearly done animation work for this version of the game, so I don't think it's that big of a deal. As far as the multiplayer discussion is concerned, this one is potentially a little bit more damning. I don't really know why the Steam page would say that it's single player only if there are multiplayer elements in the game. Potentially it could be something that Square Enix will update once they actually reveal it, but that would be a weird thing to change if people are already able to pre-order the game. I don't know how that works in terms of Steam listings, so that one's a little bit suspicious. But at the same time, there's anti-cheat and other systems like that that have also been described on the Steam page, and it would be really weird to have that just for a single-player experience. So, not entirely sure what that's about. It's also worth noting that Matsuno was directly asked by someone on Twitter, and he's actually been getting bombarded with a lot of questions, and it seems like he's gotten fed up with it as he actually made a little statement about it. But regardless, asking about the existence of multiplayer functionality or multiplayer content in this version of the game. Specifically, they were asking if, since there doesn't appear to be multiplayer at this time, will the content from Rendezvous and Melee be added to the base game to be earned? And Matsuno, as always, was kind of cagey. He can't talk about that stuff, refer to Square Enix with any questions, yada, 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 and look out for more info in the future. And what's interesting is that's pretty much how he always seems to talk when someone asks him something that he could potentially confirm is in the game, but obviously can't because he's under NDAs. But again, I've been referring to this wink, wink, nudge, nudge, elbow in the ribs kind of mentality that he seems to have on Twitter, where he'll do what he can to hint to people that, like, the answer is yes or no, and just not state it directly. So maybe this is huge copium on my part because I am actually a big fan of the multiplayer. I referenced this in my previous video analyzing the reveal trailer as a whole, but I'm choosing currently to take this as a sign that there will be multiplayer functionality in some way. If there actually will be, only time will tell. Now, beyond just the fact that we just can't prove that most of this stuff isn't in the game, and so of course I want people to kind of chill until we get confirmation one way or the other, I also feel like there's just little reason to remove a lot of this stuff. People have pointed to the fact that Matsuno and basically none of the original dev team worked on the War of the Lions version of the game. And so maybe there's some sort of grudge or discontent there. They don't want to add things that weren't in the game originally. But I don't think that that's really a mentality that Matsuno has. He's talked fondly about the War of the Lions release in the past. He's praised the retranslation. They are using said retranslation for the classic PSX version of the game that comes bundled with this new version. So I don't think that there's a ton of hate there or anything like that. I think it's a kind of weird projection to have. But also, it's just, why take out stuff that doesn't need to be taken out, right? When we already know that additional dialogue and additional scenes, potentially additional scenarios are being made for this version of the game, it would also make sense to keep in other similar aspects from the War of the Lions release. For example, the scene that shows how Wheatgraph winds up working with the church wasn't in the original release, and it's a good scene that adds a lot of context. Scenes that establish more about Beowulf and Race's backstory, very good, very interesting. Fun little scenarios that establish those characters a little better. Fun side quests where you can have Mustadio get lipstick for Agris, that gives you a really good item, and adds some very cute character interaction. Great. How does Ovelia get her knife? Very important context. These are all things that I would expect to still be in the game, and they're all additions that were made with War of the Lions, and I don't really see those being removed anytime soon. For special characters like Luceau and Balthier, I could see it a little bit more, as those were basically cross-promotion for other relevant Final Fantasy games at the time. I believe Luceau, his game FFT 2 wasn't even out at that point, so it was a good way to introduce his character to people who may not have been interested in A2. And then Balthier is just a fan favorite, and FF12 is connected to Ivalice through the overall meta story of the Ivalice games, so that makes sense. But those characters aren't nearly as relevant anymore, so I could see them wanting to take them out to remove clutter or whatever. But at the same time, they're part of the game and they're part of Final Fantasy's history. They already exist. Why not leave them in, Maybe it's a VA work thing, something along those lines, where they couldn't reprise the lines or get new actors or get the same actors or anything like that. Who knows? But for all of these just additional things, I don't think that there would be a reason to remove them. Seeing as how the dev team is clearly okay with making additions and changes to the base version to begin with, we aren't seeing them treating it as some holy text that's completely immutable. And if that's the case, and they're not trying to directly one-to-one recreate the game with new graphics and voice acting, then I see no reason why they would feel the need to take out other stuff that's been added along the way. It didn't happen with Tactics Ogre Reborn, which got a bunch of additional features and characters and all sorts of other fun stuff from the PSP version. I would imagine that we're going to see the same thing carried over here. And that's probably the biggest piece of evidence in its favor. We have a precedent for this. We have seen Matsuno and the people behind these tactics games do this exact same thing before, where additions are made over time as new versions of a game are released, and those additions are kept and maybe even improved, see the crafting system in Tactics Ogre to Tactics Ogre Reborn, to make the most complete package that they can with each new iteration of the game that comes out. Obviously, we need to get way more information before we can draw any concrete answers about any of this, but I wanted to put to bed some of the concerns that people have had and give some potential explanations for why I think a lot of these pieces of evidence, quote-unquote, aren't as concrete as people are taking them currently. As far as more information is concerned, it is actually very possible that we will be getting more information very, very soon. At time of recording, Jeff Keighley's Summer Games Fest is coming up in just a few hours, actually. I gotta get this video out and schedule that stream. But it's very possible that we will see more about tactics at that showcase. It's happened in the past where there will be game announcements from individual studios or big publishing labels, and companies like Sony and Microsoft will have a showcase where they show off a bunch of stuff, but then they'll also give more information about those announcements at fests like Summer Games Fest and the Game Awards and things like that, because let's be honest, they're pretty much the most viewed gaming events in the world at this point, and it behooves these companies to get that massive audience's eyes on their big shiny new thing after they've had the chance to introduce it in the way that they wanted to. So I have my hopes that we'll see more about tactics extremely soon, and of course I'll be discussing any reveals that we see about that as soon as we get them, so keep your eyes tuned here. But for now, we need to just wait and see. Bombarding Mr. Matsuno with questions isn't going to help. Speculating endlessly about what has been added or removed at this point based off of extremely limited context and information is not going to help. Just got to sit back and have patience. I know that's hard. I certainly don't have a lot right now because I'm eager to see so much more of this game. But try and cool your jets, everybody. We'll get more information soon. That's all I wanted to say about this topic for now. We will be discussing way more tactics soon, but until then, once again, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you to all of my channel supporters through my members and my Patreon. You've been seeing their names scroll by on the right side of the screen. Thank you to all of you for watching. Most importantly, I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, everybody. And remember, be good to each other, y'all. Bye now.